All right, let's talk about measles. I want to talk through the clinical presentation of measles for parents so that they know what to watch for as measles cases circulate around the country and perhaps in your community. Now, I wasn't planning on recording this today, but we just had a news report last night that there was the first case in Lancaster County, where we live, since 1990, which means that parents these days, including myself, haven't seen measles in the community. So you don't necessarily know what to watch for when it comes to measles. And if you have a millennial doctor, they've probably not seen a case. Now, I did see a case of measles once during residency in an immune suppressed child that was on chemotherapy and those sorts of things, but otherwise it's not something that we've seen in the community. So it's worth a refresher for parents and for healthcare professionals on what to actually look for when it comes to measles. Measles is interesting in that it follows a very specific timeline of symptoms that helps in figuring out what's going on. There's going to be a couple different things we're going to talk about. First today is the incubation period, and then the 3 C's, which are the way that, when we're trying to memorize lots of different things in medical school, that we keep track of, okay, there's 3 C's of measles, and then what the rash looks like. Now, the tricky part about measles is that it has a long incubation period. So typically, when you think of the flu or something like that, somebody coughs or sneezes in your face, and 2 or 3 days later, you have a fever and a cough and a sneeze, and you're like, oh yeah, that person coughed and sneezed in my face, and now I'm sick as well. Measles can take 2 to 3 weeks for symptoms to show up. So you get exposed at the grocery store or at church or at school or at Target or wherever it might be. It can take several weeks for symptoms to show up, which makes it very difficult to figure out where people have gone, who they've seen, those sorts of things while they were in the incubation period. And it's also tricky to track down exactly when they got exposed, because it might have been 2 weeks ago, might have been 3 weeks ago. It's hard to remember all the different places that you went to for tracking purposes. That doesn't mean that you're not necessarily contagious during that period, but you're most contagious when your symptoms start to show up. Now, the 3 C's of measles. The first one is cough. So it's cough, coryza, and conjunctivitis. So the first C, cough. Now, if you get a cold, you have a little runny nose and a little bit of a cough typically. This is different with measles. The cough is almost like croup in that it is intense, it is barky or brassy, and it is persistent. And despite it being one of the first symptoms, it's one of the ones that lasts the longest, because the measles virus infects those cells and destroys those cells of your respiratory epithelium tract. And so you're just constantly coughing to clear your airway from all of that gunk. It can take weeks for the cough to go away, and it can be intense, makes it difficult to sleep, makes it difficult to eat and drink, makes it difficult to breathe easily. And it is a common cause of hospitalization, is because we have so much inflammation in the airway, the difficulty with breathing when it comes to measles. Now, the second C is coryza, which is just a fancy medical word for a runny nose. And it's not the typical runny nose, like I have a little bit of a stuffy nose right now. It's not that. It's called, in the olden days, it was described as the lead pipe, which means like the constant stream of runny nose and gunk coming out, because your respiratory epithelium is shedding all of those cell lines. Your immune system is trying to fight the infection and respond to that. And it is just that constant serious dripping of gunk coming out your nose because of all of the ongoing inflammation and infection fighting. The intense runny nose, rhinorrhea, really contributes to how crummy kids feel, because they just have this constant pouring of gunk out of their nose. And then, so there's cough, there's coryza, and then there's conjunctivitis. Now, conjunctivitis, inflammation of the lining of the eyes. We think of this a lot of times with pink eye or viral or bacterial pink eye, where they get a little bit of redness, sometimes of this area, the conjunctiva or the sclera, the white of the eye becomes red. This is different in measles. It's not the little gunky eyes or a little bit of redness. It is intense. It is swelling of the conjunctiva and redness there. And it is also, they get this photophobia, which means you'll see the child squinting to try to protect their eyes from too much light coming in because of the intensity of the inflammation of the eye. So there's cough, there's coryza, there's conjunctivitis, and then there's one other C, which is Koplik spots, which actually starts with a K, but everyone just says it's a C because it's easy to remember all the C's. Koplik spots, named after Dr. Koplik, I imagine, are little white grains. It looks like little white grains of sand in the mouth on the inner cheek surface. Now, these are hard to detect, and most people don't see these because they are transient. They're right before the rash shows up. So you really have to be on the lookout of, hey, I think they have measles. They don't have the rash yet. I'm going to look inside their mouth back by the second molars and see if we see these little white spots. Those are called Koplik spots, and it's not something that usually is detected when it comes to measles, unless there's a big outbreak and everyone is primed for it, and they're seeing the cough and the runny nose and the eyes. They're not seeing the rash yet, and they're looking in the mouth to try and say, okay, maybe this is measles, but let's look for those Koplik spots. That would be the time that you would typically see those. Now, when it comes to the rash, typically occurs at the time of the fever. And I should stop and just talk about the fever for the minute. The fever is different than the typical viral fever that we see, where it's a bell-shaped curve. They feel crummy, it quickly gets to its height, and then it recedes back down. The fever in measles is more of a stair step. It's 101. And it holds there for a day or two. 102, 103, 104. It keeps escalating in a stair-step fashion and can last for days and days. The fever contributes to the metabolic demand that these children are under because the fever uses more of the body's resources, which is why you see more issues with dehydration when you have a fever, which fast breathing and fast heart rate is because of the increased metabolic demand. And it can be difficult for kids to keep up with hydration, with food, with those sorts of things when they feel so crummy. So it's really just like fighting this fever. Now, the rash itself, it starts typically behind the hairline or behind the ears and in the scalp, because it's a very capillary dense area, and these viral immune complexes deposit there, and it causes those red spots to show up there first and then spread down the course of the body. And what you'll see over several days is a progression of those red spots that occur all over, and they work their way down the body, and then they merge, they get confluent. So they merge together to form big red raised patches. The rash will last for several days and then start to fade. And sometimes what you'll see after the rash fades, this is really deep into it, so you've established that they have measles by now, but what you'll see is this copper staining. So the rash starts to go away, but the iron from the deposits of these immune complexes, from blood in the skin, like bruising, will leave this iron coppery deposit in the skin, so they'll have a little bit of copper staining to the rash after it starts to go away. So that's a big picture of what symptoms we typically see with measles. Those are the acute symptoms. Now, down the road, what we can see is that measles attacks the immune system. It attacks those B cells that your child has worked really hard, and you as the parent have worked really hard to build up all of the immune cells so that your child isn't constantly fighting every infection because they've seen them before and they have immune memory. Measles attacks those and can cause immune amnesia. So the things that they were immunized against, the infections that they faced, can come back again because measles wipes out the immune system. It's like taking the hard drive and hitting delete on all the files there. You lose all of those files and all of that experience that your immune system has had before. So hopefully that makes sense and gives you a little bit of a heads up of what to expect or what to look for when it comes to actually seeing measles versus a typical runny nose or a typical cold. Now, the one where it can be confusing is if you have fever and then rash. That is not typically measles. Measles, the fever and the rash occur at the same time. Roseola, fever, feeling crummy, fever goes away, and then the rash shows up. So that's probably the number one where there can be a little bit of confusion of, is this roseola or is this measles? Measles is much more intense. There's other symptoms at the time of the fever, and roseola, by contrast, has fever, feeling crummy, and then the fever breaks and rash occurs. Hopefully this has been helpful. I'm happy to do more of these videos. Drop comments below. Help me understand what the questions that you're facing. Keep up the good work.